I'm tough. Can we start this thing? Okay, are you ready?
Yeah, ready.
We're going to start. How long do you think you'll speak?
Well, usually 30 minutes, but
Yeah.
I can compress it
No,
if you
no,
want.
no, don't compress. 30 is
Yeah.
fine. But
And
we want to
please,
leave.
please give me a reminder when we hit 25.
Yeah,
Just say
because,
that 25. So
yeah,
a lot of us have very little discipline. We get carried away.
maybe. And then we want to leave time for questions,
Yeah.
that's all. Okay, so you're okay with the slide presentation?
Seems like, yeah.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Okay. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for coming today. I'm Gwen Robinson, past president and board member of the Foreign Correspondents Club of Thailand. And as you know, we're all here today to hear Dr. Amitav Acharya on the. Sorry, I've got a cough, probably partly due to out there. So if I break into a paroxysm of coughing, I'll let Amitav take over. Anyway, the big question today is there any possibility that Burma could turn a corner in 2025? A lot of people think not. Some people think so. It will be very interesting to hear what Amitav thinks. And I think you've all read the blurb, and you know that he's got a very impressive career as an academic. He is currently Distinguished Professor and UNESCO Chair in Transnational Challenges and Governance at the School of International Service, American University in Washington. He is also Chair of the ASEAN and Indo-Pacific Studies Initiative at American University. Author of quite a few books. Recent ones are, as you can see today, Tragic Nation Burma, Why and How Democracy Failed. Now, there are copies of that on sale here for about 10% discount, so it's a good time to buy it because the author's here and he can sign it. They're 760 baht, I think. So feel free if you want a copy. And the other thing is, for those, I know you're here because you're interested in Burma, so we are organising an event to mark the 4th anniversary of the coup, which will be on February 3rd. We haven't got a blurb up on the website because we just have to finalise we can get the right speakers. Impossible on the 31st, but we think it will be the 3rd and it'll be at the evening. So watch for an announcement on that, but it's most likely to be the 3rd at 7 p.m. here with some interesting speakers. And the other thing is we've got quite a few other events if people are interested in rail travel in China. We've got an extremely interesting author who's just published a book about the politics and the economics of China's huge railway boom, Thomas Bird, and he'll be speaking here in the evening on the 27th with Richard Barrow, the very famous train blogger and train spotter, as well as a couple of others. So keep that in mind if you're interested in railways in China. Or in Thailand, as you know, Richard's speciality is that. So to move right along now, I think I will turn over to Amitav. I will just say one thing. Amitav's book came out in 2023, late 23, I think. But it was really, it distinguished itself because he looked through the prism of a lot of the young people, including students, graduates, and younger people who joined the resistance and also some CDM people who left comfortable jobs in government, and it examined why young people felt this way. So I think that was an important book in so many ways to look at the impact on society, but particularly this generation that is now emerging as truly a lost generation, a tragic generation. So anyway, I think that alone distinguished your book. Anyway, I think I'll turn over to you. And yes, we would like some insight on whether Myanmar's going to turn a corner. And if so, which way, up or down? Over to you.
Thank you.
He'll speak, and then there's plenty of time for questions afterwards.
Right, I will have my timer on. Thank you. Thank you, Gwen. It's really nice for you to invite me. I don't, you will not know, but I knew Gwen through correspondence when she was with the Financial Times. And she was one of the very few editors of a major global paper who actually encouraged me to write. She said, you can write up to 4 articles for Financial Times. And I did publish 4, including one on Bandung and the East Asia Summit. Then she left, and my career with Financial Times ended. I did publish 1 more after that. But thank you for that encouragement. And I do acknowledge you in the book of my op-ed that came out a few years later. And I was very pleased to touch base with her again in Bangkok through many conferences with Chulalongkorn University and other places, most recently in Jakarta. So just a little background. As Gwen pointed out, why another book on, I'm going to say Burma, okay? Please forgive me. I have no ideological reason for Burma, Myanmar. I just find it easier. We grew up knowing about Burma. I grew up in India, and we knew this was Burma. And as a child, this was the destination for many Indians to go, and just like Singapore is these days. So Rangoon and Burma were the places to go. When I actually left for New Delhi, the old doctor in my village, who was 80 years old, said, where are you going? I said, I'm going to Singapore. He said, you mean you're going to Burma, Rangoon? I said, no, Singapore is a different place. So that's how we used to know. And that's also part of the tragedy of modern Burma, because it was at one point the most promising economy in Southeast Asia. Okay, so this book then was, why this is different is because I decided to target very young people, the CDMs. You have heard about PDFs, LDFs, EOs, but the category that I wanted to deal with most are CDMs. One of the reasons is that most of them, or not all of them, are students. And I taught in Burma twice, at Yangon University and at Mandalay, 2012 and 2015-16. I was sent there by Open Society Institute to restart their courses on international relations. I'm an international relations professor, and they asked me to, those programs are closed down, and I think the Yangon University program on international relations undergraduate program had closed down since 1997 or 87, and they wanted me to restart. So the first lecture, what is international relations, and what is, I'll show you a photo of that later. Very moving, touching experience. And then I ended up doing a lot of other things, talking to NGOs, former political prisoners, and government. I was actually asked to conduct a few courses by the Myanmar Foreign Ministry when it became the chair of ASEAN. 1st of January, I was there to train them on how to become a chair of ASEAN. I did advise, and I'll be very honest with you, it's Coco Line, who was Thein Sein's chief political advisor. He asked me to help with training some of the younger people. And I said, as long as they include everybody, not just the government, not just the military, but also civil servants and students, and I did that. So we were kind of betting that this will be irreversible, and I was, of course, very careful. After 2016, I did not go back, and I knew things were changing. And this a coup or a military takeover was inevitable. In fact, well, a year before that, in the draft of another book on ASEAN, I said a dramatic breakdown of the democratic experiment is quite possible. I'll show it to you. And because I thought, based on what the military told me and the way the political parties told me, there were some things in the military that they were preparing for as early as 2016. They had not completely reconciled themselves to being second fiddle. So there were some red line markers, and I was able to figure this out. But we hope for the best. I mean, we thought maybe this can be avoided. Unfortunately, it wasn't. So let me just start by giving you the main arguments. The book is published in 2023. The book, again, is based on a lot of interviews with the younger generation of CDM activists, students, but also it did some history of, say, the post-World War II Myanmar, because as you know, the subtitle of the book is Why and How Democracy Failed. And it did not fail just because of the events of the last 2 years. The seeds of the failure are actually planted from the very beginning of Burma as an independent nation. So I start with that, 1945, 46, 47, with General Aung San, and some of the choices he made. Despite my profound admiration for him, some of the choices he made might have actually contributed to it. So I actually spent the first few chapters why this happened, what are the long-term factors, and I think you need to know that to make sense of when and if this current tragedy will end. First of all, why I call it Tragic Nation, this book, because I think Burma, Myanmar is a tragic nation. Not because it lacks natural resources or human talent. There's plenty of that. Anybody who has lived, I mean, in Singapore where I work, 2 of my neighbors are professors. They are from Burma. In Washington, D.C., quite a few people, very talented people. You know, the first Secretary General of, second Secretary General, the third was UNO, Uthant. And I am also very familiar with UNO because he participated in Bandung Conference, and I read a lot of his papers. So there are plenty of very talented people. But it's not also because of natural resources. Nobody can accuse Burma of not having natural resources, too much of it. So it is because the military has been quite predatory, and the international community has been indifferent. It's not just one or the other, the combination of the two. And its path to democracy and development has been repeatedly thwarted because of this combination of, I mean, you cannot always blame the international community. Okay, the buck stops with the domestic leadership and conditions. But still, I think the international community could have, if there is such a thing, could have done better. So, first of all, I'll go to the modern period right away after this. The contemporary, last few years. But it's not due to history, culture, geography. There was a saying that, that's a cultural thing. The Burmese cannot do democracy. In fact, Lee Kuan Yew, the late former leader of Singapore, said that too, that the military is the only solution because democracy is not in Burma's culture. And Aung San Suu Kyi replied this in a very nice, restrained, but very significant way that actually, if you look at, and she is right, there is a long tradition of democracy in many of these Asian cultures. And Buddhism is actually the first social contract theory of the state. In my new book, there's a blurb there. I trace how institutions of democracy and republic came from Buddhist Sangha. So it's really not cultural. There are other Asian cultures who managed to develop, if not perfect democracy, but fairly good democracy. I mean, sustainable electoral democracy. Burma and India were basically under British rule, and they were inseparable. And India did fairly well. In fact, the Indian constitution drafter, the Indian government, Mr. Nehru, sent a lawyer to help draft Burma's constitution. And except that Indian constitution took 3 years to draft, Burma's 3 months. It was done in a very hasty way, and that is part of the problem. I think colonial legacy and impact of World War II, where Burma was actually extremely devastated, one of the worst countries affected in Southeast Asia. And that had an impact, maybe more of an impact, and I discussed that. but not just that either. Political stability, yeah, General Aung San, despite all his wisdom and vision, actually chose stability over democracy. Now, this is not a either or choice, but there are certain choices he could have made differently, including federalism. That is something they could have actually got from India, because India did use much more of a federal structure. There was an Indian lawyer who helped drafting the Constitution of Burma, but he avoided that. And that, I think, was a fatal choice. I mean, you know, we can argue about this. I asked Aung San Suu Kyi once, why does she think? Now the opposition talks about federal democracy, okay? That was not actually taken seriously in the Constitution, not because the idea was not there in the first Constitution of Burma. He just did not want it, because the argument was that first of all, he was under a lot of constraint, tried to balance too many ethnic groups and factions, and the Burma, he was seen as the head of the Burma majority. Minority didn't trust him. The British has cultivated the minority in a way that gave them a lot more independence, and it instilled the fear of the Burma majority. The British did that everywhere in the world. So in India, the Burma, so promote the minority and create the fear that if you don't get your views, and you will be squashed by the majority. And they were responsible for dividing India, but they did not quite divide Burma in the same way, but made it very difficult to create a unitary state. And that history is Joe Silverstein and many others have written about. I'm not the first one, but it's very clear that Aung San did not want a federal system because he was afraid that the country will fall apart. But that was not the case. In fact, exactly the other way around. And that's why the current model of creating a federal democracy in Burma, to me, is something that is 6 decades too late, but still my work if the country comes out of the present tragedy. And there is I was looking for one killer quote, so to speak, from many writings in Burma, and I found that in U Nu's autobiography, Saturday's Sun. And I thought, I'm a political scientist, so I study developing countries, global South countries, why they have specific security problems and international relations problems. And I thought this model was really very useful to Burma. It's regime survival. Now you can add regime security, privilege, and now, of course, survival. Now, in many countries in the developing world, after decolonization, they start with a democracy. It's true of Philippines, it's true of Indonesia, it's true of many parts of the world. Democracy nominally is the first default option, at least an electoral democracy. Then they move away from it, and partly because some factions, some political parties, some ambitious leader feels that the privileges the person has enjoyed are too good to miss. And they then get used to staying in power, and regime security becomes more important than national security or well-being. And it's a very simple explanation, but it really holds true of many countries, and Burma is no different. So this is what U Nu wrote, that after the 62, the coup, some military officers, being only human, begin to cover the power of the politicians, and since they have the weapons, they are tempted to use them as a readier and surer means of gaining political control, rather than risk defeat in free elections. Now, it's very simple, but very true of many countries in the developing world. And I don't think General Ne Win and the military originally wanted to turn Burma into an autocracy. Now, but once you are in power, and now that there is privilege, the military has tremendous privilege. It's like a golden cage. You cannot leave. Well, you can. There are many ways of describing it. Once you're in the career, you get free education, you get free medical, your career is set, and if you leave, you are bullied. In fact, sometimes you could be killed. So there's no way to escape. But you are at the same time enjoying privileges that your neighbors and others cannot. So it's very hard to leave. This is the golden cage, or whatever you call it, or hostage. Some people call it a hostage situation. And that's why it has been difficult to get military to defect, although that is happening. But it's not happening the way people had expected. in 2021. That'll be large-scale defections because there are both coercive and positive incentives and coercion against defection. So I think that really explains to simplify a very complicated story. So after that, I look at the immediate circumstances of the coup, what led the failure of negotiations between Aung San Suu Kyi and the general, and also choices that NLD made. Maybe my suggestion, very humble suggestion, and as a total outsider, is to give the current system one more generation. Okay, rather than. I mean, the NLD has absolutely every right to want Aung San Suu Kyi to be the leader, and they have to get rid of the constitution that gives the military a guaranteed, sort of almost like a veto in decision making. But it's sometimes good to be pragmatic and say, let these people get used to not being in power. And one difference between Burma and Indonesia also came out of a similar situation, and at one point people thought Burma could follow the Indonesian model. But the Indonesian generals certainly became politicians, very successful politicians. You see that current President Prabowo, but Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, whom I knew personally very well, they actually became very good politicians. Populist, but the Burmese military could not do it. They were never, their situation was they were so kind of isolated, self-isolated. They cannot move. Thein Sein did a good job to the best of possibility, but they could not really become politicians as a way the Indonesians could. So Indonesia has a lot of imperfections. It was a model for Burma, but nobody talks about it anymore. Indonesia also decentralized, adopted a more federal system. Okay, so I think that was one of the reasons I think this happened, that we have a situation where the country has gone from bad to worse, and the window of the after 2008 and then 2011 elections, and I kept arguing with some military, some NLD people that don't push too hard. Now you have a good situation, and it's not perfect, but if you do that, there is a red line within the military, and I knew this because I talked to quite a number of military officers and the colonel, even including a couple of very senior people, that if they feel that they're going to lose power in a pre-democratic election, and there's too much demand, too much push, then they will not accept it. There will be a coup. And which is why later I'll show that in my 2021 book, just a year before the coup, I had already drafted the dramatic reversal of Burma's democracy is quite possible. Okay, so moving on now to what's happening in Burma. Now, some of you have got much more day-to-day knowledge of this. This book ended in 2022, published in 23, and I haven't been back to Burma since 2017, so 2016 in fact. But I've followed it, and I have a lot of students, now as here in Thailand, there are tons of people, exiles, but also people who migrated, students of mine. You can get information from them, what's happening, but none of this information is perfect. There's nothing that you can say, this is what is happening in Burma. The number of refugees, displaced people, number of people imprisoned. So I'm giving you a notional figure. So the ACLED is, this chart is a good snapshot of what's happening till October 2024. So the violence has escalated dramatically since the coup. Nothing profound here, we all know that, but you can see where the violence is, or what they call armed conflict is happening. But some more snapshots. I give credit to my son, who is sitting somewhere there as my research assistant, to put this together, some data. He's a just high school graduate. Where is Arun? He's sitting over there. And I put together some latest data for me. So from World Bank, UN sources some media sources. So over half of the country's township experiencing active conflict, of course not in the south, but mostly in the northeast, and of course Kachin as well, and Sagaing. But it's moving towards the center. Mandalay is being attacked, and in fact could be the first major metropolitan town, the traditional heartland of Burma to fall, if that happens. We have 5,350 civilian deaths. Again, I think it's an understatement, but we can't prove it either way. And 3.3 million displaced, maybe more, 27,000. This is UN data, UNHCR data. And close to 2,000 have died in custody. This figure of refugees is also contestable, including the Rohingya in Bangladesh. There could be more, and of course there are a lot of them in Thailand, which is a 24,000 kilometer border with Burma. But what is also very tragic is the torture methods that the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, not refugees, human rights, recently came out with this statement of how they're using animals, such as snakes and insects and other wild animals, to terrorize people. So gross abuse of human rights, deaths, and we actually don't have the clear picture 100%. There are a lot of people who have connections inside Burma, including some of my students, some of my sources, but they also cannot be totally sure. The US Institute of Peace supplies a lot of information, and some of them are very credible, but I'm not disputing. But it's a very tragic situation by any means, by all means. Refugees in Thailand, again, the UNHCR data, but I really think it's an underestimate. Some people say that there are over 4 million, maybe even 5, economic migrants in Thailand, and the economic situation is pretty dire. The GDP is going to contract by 1%, and doubling of poverty line since 2021. And most importantly, the long-term effect, the lost generation, people who are not being trained, not going to school, and that is actually going to be the most tragic outcome of this. We have a whole generation, or maybe two, even if it comes out of the current tragedy in next year or two. It's not going to take, it's not going to be, the economy is not going to recover, the society is not going to recover immediately. It will take a generation. I think that generation is somebody that I dealt with I call them thought warriors, because thought warriors, they're civil disobedience, they're not warriors. And I had one criteria when we did a survey, kind of a research by stealth, circulated a questionnaire to this civil disobedience movement. And I have never met them, I do not know their name, I didn't want to because of the security risk there, but they were very enthusiastic, and I shared them the manuscript when I finished, and before the manuscript. And a friend of mine who was based in Yangon really played a very important role. It's up to him if he wants to identify himself. He's in this audience, but I'm not going to reveal him either. This thought warriors, they are going to be the biggest losers. These are actually very smart. Some of them speak perfect English. Some of them came out and studied with me in Washington. We have a small society of Myanmar students in my university. They're living everywhere. But if you talk to them, you'll just feel really sorry. This is a generation that's, those who left, okay, they're lucky. Those who are left behind, they were so ambitious. They had, just like anybody in any society, want to have ambitions, and have also good universities. Yangon University recovered pretty well, and again, I was a professor there, and the amount of interest, the inquisitiveness was so much that they wanted to learn. And I'll tell you, even among the people who are in political prisons, I conducted a workshop for them through my friend Jagannath, the comedian. It's just so tragic to see that this generation is going to lose everything, all hope, although they haven't lost hope completely. Okay, opposition gains, we know this is the most dramatic development in the last year and a half. It gives us some hope. So Operation 1027, Three Brotherhood Alliance, I don't want to get too much detail. Yeah, you can take photos. And this is not in the book because this happened after the book was published. Then most recently, the Arakan Army took over, took control of the Western Regional Command Headquarters in An Township in Rakhine State. So those are significant setbacks. So why this is important is because until now, until maybe mid of 2023, we thought there was a stalemate. So the opposition was not winning, the military was not losing. But now people are beginning to accept increasingly that the stalemate has been broken and there is a hope for a military victory by the opposition forces. Because they are also coordinating. So the PDFs, LDFs, and EAOs, and the NUG, they all are coordinating in a way. We expected some coordination, but this has gone very well. And there is one statistics that says that direct coordination led to capture of 80 towns and 200 military bases. Again, all this data questionable, but some is notional. But I think that's quite possible. There are actually some statistics much higher rate of capture of towns. And some of this cooperation is dramatic. So when the Three Brotherhood Alliance, actually two of the three, attacked the Lazio command, so the military tried to reinforce them, their troops in the front through the road from Mandalay, and they were blocked. And that's a concrete example of cooperation. And that's one of the reasons why Lazio, the Northeast Command Headquarters, fell. And there are many such examples. But the downside is that in fighting, you know that is the traditional tragedy. One aspect of the tragedy of Burma is that the opposition groups don't cooperate. The ethnic groups are also very mistrustful of each other. And so once they capture some territory, who is going to control it? And they get into fighting. Who is going to administer it? Who is going to control the territory? So there is a territorial administrative competition among them, and that is also hampering the ultimate victory of the opposition over the military. There are more than 300 cases of armed clashes among these opposition groups. And there is another thing that can be disturbing, but maybe premature to worry about it, that because of the intense pressure from China and also increasingly seeing that the military diplomacy from Thailand, they think that they may have to, and also there is some desire from ASEAN that this will be settled by negotiation. Until then, the opposition groups did not want to have political negotiations, not participate in elections. But they are probably under some pressure to at least make some statements that we will participate, we will do a deal. Now, I don't take that very seriously because they said one thing today and tomorrow they change that tune. But it's something to keep in mind. It's also possible under certain conditions they will, if not participate in the elections, but certainly participate in some sort of a deal. Keep that in mind. Okay, so this is the key summary of what I'm going to talk about after the background. So now there is a hope for an opposition victory, very remote, but still there is a much more plausible than 2 years ago. China is playing a key role in preventing collapse, and this is well documented. The regime has been, China is extracting in return the promise of elections, but we know that the elections are not going to really be free and fair, but at least that's China's way of dealing with it. I think the military is going for elections, even those fake elections, to secure the support of military-backed parties, bring them in, build a broader coalition, and also internal, to manage internal dissension. ASEAN's case, ASEAN is very fragmented. I'll show you why ASEAN is fragmented. This is why. ASEAN is still sticking to the 5-point consensus, IPC, which I thought was premature. The day after that, I gave an interview to Al Jazeera. I said it's too early and it was a mistake. Could have done this after the regime gave you some concrete promises, not before it gave you promises. Inviting the general to Jakarta was a mistake. And that has not really gone very far. But it is still the default position. It's like allows ASEAN to say, we're doing something. We have a plan. But this plan is never really taken off. But also, although ASEAN has the formal sort of official position not to invite representative of the regime, but only non-political representatives. But According to one source, again, one has to be careful about this. The regime officials have attended more than 500 ASEAN meetings in 2021. So, and countries like Thailand, Cambodia, Laos have allowed them. But these are not probably very, ASEAN has what, more than 1,000 meetings a year, Kavi? So out of that, they can attend 5. Not all of them are at the ministerial level, but some of them are pretty consequential. So it gives the sense to the military that we can carry on, when our time will come. So I think this has been one issue. And then the informal consultations of Thailand. I am somewhat sympathetic to the informal consultation because Thailand did this. Kavi would know, Kun Kavi would know, in battlefields to marketplaces, and constructive intervention was not very helpful in the beginning, but in the end, it gave, if there is a solution at hand, this process, ASEAN's role could be useful. And I think you never know. Hun Sen would not be prime minister unless Chat Chaitanavan invited him to Bangkok and say, let's have a talk, battlefield to marketplaces. And Indonesia took over from there to the Jakarta informal meetings. And these are informal consultations. I see some parallel as a Southeast Asia historian, but we'll see. Moving back then to the prospects, the West, the Thai initiative is like a lifeline because the military is under intense pressure, losing, they see anything is good. So the support from China basically does this. So it's taken a much more active role, partly because it's in China's security interest, because of the scams that are happening in the border, and it was hurting Chinese people and also Chinese economy. So China has every reason to take an active role. I'm not criticizing that role, but what kind of role? And so it basically thwarted the possibility of a further opposition victories at a very critical time. And first it negotiated a truce and didn't work, and then closed the border gates to Kachin and northern Shan state to pressure a resistance group to stop fighting. There are some very dramatic stories about this. The US IP has done some studies on this, allowed the UNTA leader, General Min Aung Hlaing, to visit China Kunming to one of those Mekong summits. His first since the coup, so it's not a simple thing. It's one thing for the Chinese foreign minister to visit, Naypyidaw just to meet, but it's another thing to invite the leader or allow the leader to go to China, not to Beijing for sure, but to Kunming. Some sort of a legitimation. But in the indication is this is the China's foreign position. Myanmar should not be subject to civil war, but Myanmar is already in a civil war. I don't know. Maybe I don't understand diplomatic language. It's a way to wish away something that has already happened. So maybe it should not lead to a military solution to the problem, maybe. That's what China is meaning by this, that the opposition should not win. And that's what they have tried to ensure. I had some disagreement with some American friends, including some former American ambassadors, about how China has the capacity to actually stop a collapse of the regime. And I thought China did, and my colleague, ambassadorial colleague, said China cannot. And I think we may both be right. In the short term, China can prevent. In the long term, cannot, because China doesn't have control over all the opposition forces. Only close to the Wa and of course the northern Shan and maybe the Kachin, but not to Chin and further south. Cannot supply them with the weapons and money. So China also, I think, will be pragmatic enough to accept the defeat of the military when the time comes. So but in the meantime, it had managed to stop it. The immediate collapse that we are all very enthusiastic about, that, this is happening, is going to take some time, if it happens ever. And this buys the military regime some time to see if they can make a proper compromise. And one of the compromises would be elections. So the elections are a very interesting way of fine-tuning and soft landing this crisis. Southeast Asia, those of you who study Southeast Asia, elections are not very perfect here. But they're better than in some countries than others. But what the elections could do is to give you legitimacy. If you can organize the election, no matter how many people participate, you say, we have the election legitimacy. You bring in some more military-backed parties, and then if the elections can be successfully conducted, even with 30%, 40% participation, I think China will accept it, India will accept it, ASEAN will accept it. America will not accept it, Europe will not accept it, but who cares as far as they're concerned. So they want some sort of a regime, but the thing is the regime may not be able to do it because the situation may have gone too far. Census was very poorly done, I mean, not very representative. And when the fighting is actually happening, to do even a very fake election, staged election is going to be difficult. But if they do it, and they somehow the narrative, it'll be a matter of narratives. No matter what the Western media says, Western government says, they will claim legitimacy. And this has happened in Southeast Asia over and over again. With flawed constitutions, fully attended elections, but the result is we have an election. And so that's possible. Again, the final thing on it, the Western approach, of course, passing the buck to ASEAN, let ASEAN manage it is the easy way. But also now, the West has been seriously, is there a West anymore? I mean, when the United States is imposing 20% or 25% market on Canada, threatening. What is the West? The largest trading partner of the United States is Canada, in terms of until China become the major exporter. Canada-US trade was the largest trade in the US. And now Canadians are on the receiving end of America. What is the West? What about Germany? What about NATO? So when the West is disunited, and the United States, of course, Donald Trump has already suspended foreign aid. So for 3 months, but we'll see how much foreign aid can Myanmar get. There is an American Burma Act in 2023, some of you know. And this is a total of 121 million mark for 2024. This is something, I mean, not a lot, nothing like what the US is giving to Ukraine or to Israel, but certainly something to build capacity for pro-democracy groups, non-lethal technical assistance, including to PDFs, and NUG and the NUCC and the other groups, assistance for refugees. But I am not sure how much of that will now come because it has to be appropriated year by year. And now with a different president, very unusual president, that's another story. Yeah. So, okay, so to conclude now then, I think balkanization is a possibility. That's the worst thing, that Burma will be permanently balkanized. I hope not, and it's by no means inevitable, but this is something one should to be aware of, take into account that this might happen. But there are many ways it may not happen. I mean, a dramatic military opposition victory, which will be recognized by China and the international community, could prevent it. But there is one thing, that these the PDFs and EAOs in particular, they're now testing power. The areas they have captured, they're administering it. Are they going to go back and to participate in the federal democratic constitution? It will be, General Aung San's predicament all over again. How to bring them in, because they also don't trust the Burma. They don't trust each other. So how do you bring them back at this point? And when they've tested power, they've set up their own justice system, administrative system, taxation system. So we'll see how this is going to work. So it could be also a permanent balkanization, or there will be a core area which is united and peripheral areas which will be separated for all practical purposes. This is the worst case scenario in the long term, apart from the killings and deaths and lost generation thing I talked about. Okay, so let me just stop here. I want to show you a few pictures that took part of my book preparation and some of my best memories of the 2010s. So it is not an academic book. I'm an academic, and very traditional academic at that, the theory of international relations. But this book is not so much of an academic theory, although I apply some theories, but in a very indirect way. But it's actually written with a bunch of people that I call thought warriors, because they renounce violence. And I thought this is a different perspective. And they were quite right. One of the things they told me is that if they don't trust NUG, they don't trust NLD, they don't trust Aung San Suu Kyi, they trust the EAOs. This is amazing. That many of them told me if there is going to be return to democracy, I think the ethnic armed organizations will do it. And I was really dumbfounded by this. But they said, these people are fighting on the ground, we want to support them. And this is the first time they've come together in a meaningful way. Very idealistic, maybe. These are people in the late teens and 20s. But I thought we'll write with them, back and forth, and with comments. And I thought some of the views are very interesting. This is my seminar in 2011 with the Jurgenar, with the former, all of them are media people, artists. They're not comedians, drama, singers. And this guy called Jurgenar, one of the most famous comedians after the Mustas brothers who have died, he invited me to conduct a 2-day seminar. And this is what I'm saying. I went there. They wanted to learn about everything. I said, what's the subject? He said, tell us everything. And I passed on about 100 PDFs, soft copies of books and articles, and I lectured for 2 days, just like that. And these are all former political prisoners. And then we have the students. This is one of the fondest memories I have, restarting the course on international relations to first-year students. When I became the president of American International Studies Association, the largest international studies association in the world, I had this on my my screen, the presidential address. I said, this is what is going to happen to the future of international relations. People from all over the world will study a discipline that until recently was called an Western or American political science. Okay, and I also was the first person to be invited to give the talk to the newly restored Myanmar Union of Journalists after 50 years of ban. And very idealistically, future of democracy. Myanmar challenges transition to democracy. And this is the training program on peace, democracy, and development with Coco Lang, senior advisor to General Thein Sein. And, but this was attended by a cross-section of young people, technocrats. And of course, this is my best memories, giving lectures in puppet theaters. And some of my students actually live nearby, and this is the Mandalay marionette. And talking about democracy, talking about civil rights, talking about Western style versus Eastern style democracy, and being given, they asked me what would I like to have as a gift. I said, give me the best puppet you have. And the best puppet was made by the owner, the husband of the owner of the marionette, Mandalay marionette. And this is it. This puppet is in my study. And this is one of the things one of the thought warriors wrote to me. I'll come back to it, but let me just show you 2 more slides. Okay, this is the book, my draft when in 2020. I thought one cannot rule out a dramatic reversal of the already fragile democratic process in Myanmar. And then the coup happened, and I thought, I don't have to change very much, just, change a couple of words. Because by that time, in 2018-19, I was convinced that this thing is not going very well. Because there's mutual suspicion between the NLD and the military has become really to the breaking point. And I have been told, non-certain words by military generals, that there is a red line. A red line is going, because these people just want us to be out completely, and we're not going to go anywhere. This is not the Indonesia situation. Okay, so thought warriors, my partners in this project, and they read the manuscript after I finished it, and gave me some comments. And one of them always stays with me, and this is it. Every country has its own problem to solve, and a lot of them don't care about us at all. I had that feeling that we only have ourselves, and no stranger can help us. However, after reading this book and realizing how much the effort the writer has put in, it made me feel somehow motivated and emotional in a good way. This is because I got to know that there are strangers who still give attention and care for us. I will fight till the end. They are not fighting, at least they told me they're not fighting. They're helping the fight. They're fighting on the streets, not with the military. But I just hope that all of us as strangers will really care for that country. This country will not be forgotten because that is a risk. that we see today with Ukraine and Gaza and all these other crises happening, this country has been forgotten for the last few years, especially since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And strangers give attention and care for them, and that will be quite helpful. All right, that's it.
Well, thank you very much, Amitav. That was an extremely comprehensive rundown, and it's great you were able to update. I know there's probably quite a few questions. You can go up to the microphone and identify yourself and ask. But I would like to take advantage right now to come back to this question. We're hearing more and more this term of balkanization, and everyone warning that, but actually, don't you think, isn't there a form of balkanization that we could live comfortably with? I mean, it does seem like this model of central government, which always has revolved around a strong military, which is the only Burma-dominated group, has, perpetually ruled Myanmar over the ages. And now the ethnic groups have come into their own, and the kind of alliances being made in the resistance show that, they're much more mature now. There's talk of power sharing and how to do that. In fact, it is a kind of, we don't want to use the word confederation, but there's a kind of hybrid model emerging here, which would include some kind of central authority, but maybe giving much more autonomy and power to these ethnic groups, which, as we've seen in Rakhine State, are very powerful. Kachin, you're going to take that away from them and make them stay under the NUG. I think this is the big problem right now, is coming up with a solution. But is balkanization being used as a kind of bogeyman, and, it's the worst possible scenario?
Yeah, I think balkanization is an unfortunate choice of words on my part, and it's actually contrary to what I've argued in the past. I have actually, my first book, The International Relations of Southeast Asia, I examined this whole idea. A lot of British and Western historians used to call Southeast Asia the Balkans of the Orient, and I actually argued against it. I think it's unfortunate, but I thought it would capture attention. Sometimes you use words to capture attention.
Sure.
And but the case of Burma, Myanmar is a little different. So Indonesia, all the Southeast Asian countries have separatist movements. Southern Thailand, Southern Philippines, Aceh, and Papua, and India has tons of those. In fact, I was just supposed to be in Nagaland next week to attend a conference to speak about my book, but my university basically said no permission, because I still have to be under insurance. So even if the US government says go, I can't, my university will not let me go to such areas. But India is living with that. Now, I'm not here to exalt the Indian constitution. India has tons of problems, and increasingly so and so. But what happens in the case of India, there is a sense of federalism that Aung San rejected. Now, this is very simply put. The Indian constitution gives all residual powers to the center, but it gives so like the US federation, okay, the states have a lot more power than the Indian states, but compared to the federal government. In India, it's the other way around. The federal government has more power, national government, than the states, but the states have substantial power. The chief minister of a state is the second most important person in the whole country, in that state, next to the prime minister, okay, in terms of actual power. So education, except security, foreign affairs, but education, domestic law and order, unless you cannot handle, the federal government doesn't come in. And so what happens is every time there's an insurgency, Indians create a state and create a chief minister, the number two most powerful person in that state for their country, and make them happy. and let them fight it out among themselves. So federalism actually has worked. India has worked not because it's a democracy, but because it's a federal state. So whoever designed that was clever. May not last forever. So India started with 15, 16 states, now 30 states. Every time there is an insurgency, a new state is created, a new bunch of people are empowered, and let them contest the elections and fight it out. But it has succeeded because the kind of people you're talking about, the ethnic groups, a lot of them are ethnic conflicts in India too. Ethnic groups, they feel empowered because they have a power, and their main enemies are their own ethnic groups, and not some foreigners or strangers from another state. So I honestly think I can't really second guess, Aung San, and he didn't live very long. But at that time, there was an opportunity that could have been created, a genuine federal democratic state, which is exactly what the NUG is asking for. And when I asked this question to Aung San Suu Kyi in an online meeting, she said, this is a very, very controversial term. And she was not ready to sign it on. This is in 2014-15, she appeared on a Council on Foreign Relations live event online. So I think it's possible, what you are saying, that we can have a kind of managed, let's not use the term balkanization, but a managed decentralization. Indonesia did that successfully. Indonesia has a lot more decentralization than under Suharto, and that has been really helpful, and including laws in Aceh. May not like those laws, but they're laws. So I think this can happen, and I think the vision of NUG is a good one, to create the democratic federal structure. All my sources, the thought warriors, love it. None of them wanted to go back to this very unitary, centralized model. So let's hope so. I mean, but how do you get there is the problem. You have to negotiate. You have to have a constituent assembly. We know that doesn't work out very well in most countries, and it may create another monster. But that may be, let's say in the best case, there is the military regime either voluntarily gives up power or collapses under military onslaught by the opposition, and then decided, at least some elements decide to participate in the resulting process. And this is managed by ASEAN, this is supported by international community, and there will be a period of drafting a new constitution, and let's hope that will be the federal democracy that NUG is talking about. It's a good vision. And then but you have to give them actual power. You cannot say that everything will be controlled by Yangon. They have to have control over resources. They have to have control over their religion and culture. It doesn't happen in India all the time, but it happens to some extent. You cannot give them total control over the resources because that will be economic chaos. But it's not beyond the realm of possibility for a bunch of good lawyers, good political scientists, good constitution drafters. I have a very good colleague who have drafted many constitutions around the world to get this possible. So maybe that's the way to go. Think positively.
I'm assuming you don't think these sham elections, as they're being called already at the end of this year, will lead to anything.
Sorry?
The election plan of the junta.
I actually have a different view on this. And I told you, even fake elections will work in Southeast Asia. This is my observation. I said that about Cambodia. I observed the UNTAC, the United Nations Transitional Authority in Cambodia, and talked to these people. And I thought this democratic experiment is not going to last. Kavi Chankitavan was with me to some of these meetings. But in a region where, this is not uncommon, as long as you can create some legitimacy. So Hun Sen ousted Rana Reid, took power, and I thought this is going to work. I'm not very proud that I said that, but this is based on my observation of being a student of this region for 30 years and studying history. So what is better? That's better, or what's happening in Burma is better? I don't know. Many of you have been to Burma. You have to absolutely love this country. And I initially went there to study Buddhism. I'm not a Buddhist, but I like to see the sites. And it sort of reminded me of my own culture in India. But then I got interested in the politics and the history. And to see this happening, and I've talked to these people, young people, my students, it just breaks your heart. And I would think that anything that can keep these people live, and we're talking about living, not well-being, will be good. And so I'm all for democracy, but to me, a manageable democracy that keeps people alive, and a certain modicum of human rights and democracy. I once actually went to give a talk in Burma. That was before the military gave up power. I was invited by, it's a long story. So they said, I want to talk about human rights. And somebody asked me, what about democracy? I said, I don't care about democracy. I care about human rights. You have to protect your people. And democracy, no Southeast Asian country is a perfect democracy. And I've just done my work on Cambodia. But you cannot kill people, cannot torture people, you cannot imprison people. So for me, human rights is far more important than democracy. There are some very imperfect democracies in Southeast Asia. And I say the country I grew up, the United States is not perfect for democracy either. But you have to have certain protections against torture, the kind of things we saw, snakes and insects being used against people. So I guess that would be my thing, that a country, imperfect democracy, but with a set of human rights, and NGOs and foreign aid organizations will be focusing on that, then obsessed with the electoral legitimacy that is often flawed anyway. I don't know, the American elections are all that great compared to what they used to be these days. So I will be okay with that, in my limited understanding, my own understanding, that if Burma can have human rights without being a perfect democracy, that will be good better for the people than what they're going through now.
Right, but are you saying that we should give the elections a chance, or it's clearly going to be a complete sideshow?
First of all, the elections cannot happen.
Yeah.
I really don't think it is feasible with all this. Half of the country, as I said, is under fighting. So it's never possible to have.
70%, probably.
So you can have elections if the military was in total control, and they're fake, but they're manipulated, but it can actually happen. This will not happen. And the other thing is, who is going to participate? NUG is outlawed, and it's an illegal organization, so cannot participate. So I don't think the elections can happen.
53 parties, apparently.
To even the minimum degree that you need to make them appear legitimate. But let's say there is a deal, and the deal means the military accepts elections, there is international observation. Actually, the senior general did say in China that we will allow foreign observers. Well, we'll see. And genuine foreign observers. And people participate. I think the military might accept it, but the opposition might not. If they test victory, they said, why do we? What are the elections for? We were in power, we were overthrown. So their demand would be to go back to the status quo. In 2020. So I actually don't think elections will work. But if it works, it's a wish, and it leads to stability, but protection of rights and protection of lives of people, I would personally, and my views are not important, but I think the international community probably, the neighbors will accept it. What I'm saying is ASEAN, India, China will accept it.
Interesting. Well, thanks for that. I think we've got a couple of people who want to ask questions. Can you go to the microphone and identify yourself, please?
My name is Sol Zatka of Arise News Network. I spent last Christmas in Rangoon, and as I was staying in this splendid hotel, Sun Pacific, that has been built during this short window of democracy, I had a sweet dream about the fact that President-elect Trump, in his inauguration speech a month later, would issue an ultimatum to the junta in Burma and tell them, I give you 2 weeks to release Aung San Suu Kyi, to cease hostilities, to declare a date for the new elections. Otherwise, I will send my army to bomb your ridiculous new capital. As I was waking up in the morning, I was sobering up to the fact that Trump would not even know where Burma is on the map at all. And in any way, he would not care less about the situation in this part of the world. However, as I was talking to people about the situation, admittedly, I was thinking that 2024 would be the year of decision in which the army would be defeated. But as this did not happen, I was wondering if this is going to happen in this new year. Because as I was talking to people about the situation, I reached the conclusion that sometimes we conflate the facts on the ground with our wishful thinking, and also tempting to think that if the rebels control the countryside along the borders, they are going to win the war. And despite the fact that we receive reports that the rebels could be even 20 kilometers away from Mandalay, we still have to admit the fact that the army has the air superiority because of the Russian jets. You did not mention Russia. And maybe it's not going to happen without a military interference from outside. Not necessarily by committing boots on the ground, but assisting the rebels in some kind of military hardware. As one of them told me, we don't even have one single anti-aircraft that could have changed the rest of the situation.
That's very interesting. Thank you. I'm going to take that into account.
Well, it does go back to the topic of your talk, which is, can Myanmar turn a corner in 2025? And there's different definitions of corners. Militarily, maybe the resistance gains are incredible.
There is one thing that comes out of your intervention. Can there be foreign military intervention in support of democracy? This has been talked about. When the cyclone Nargis hit, the French actually talked about military intervention. They will send aircraft carrier, will force the aid to the regime, because the government at that time said, we don't want any foreign aid. And of course, it was supposed to be like a humanitarian intervention. And I was actually, Surin Pitchuan was at that time ASEAN Secretary General. I was kind of advising him informally. I said, this is not a bad idea, but why didn't ASEAN do it? And we actually thought about it. Instead of the French foreign power coming in, ASEAN can actually agree to provide as a conduit. So the idea of foreign military intervention to support human rights and democracy, or restoration of democracy, in some ways, or humanitarian purposes have been talked about. So it can be done if it is couched as a humanitarian intervention. So that the people are dying, and there's another cyclone. There's so many cyclones every year, and you send a military and foreign military. Hopefully, the United States can lead it if it has the ability, the power to do it, but that depends on so many ifs and buts. I mean, and I think if there is a serious attempt at military intervention, the military regime cannot stop it. It's much weaker now than during Nargis, when it said we are not going to allow anything. But whether who is going to lead it, the European Union, France, they all have their problems, hands full with Ukraine and domestic elections, populism. The United States, Trump, I don't know that Trump knows where Yangon is, or I bet he cannot pronounce Naypyidaw, neither can I.
Well, he managed to call Thailand.
Yeah.
So.
Thailand can do it, but won't have the capacity to do it.
I mean, he called Thailand.
But it's possible to think. Now let's think of the unthinkable. But this sort of humanitarian intervention has not happened in Southeast Asia, in my memory.
Right.
If this is the news that goes around, intimidates the military, so be it. But it's not going to happen so easily.
Okay, Lady Beth.
Hi, I'm Patricia Elliott, semi-retired professor, writer, journalist on such issues. You spoke about how in 2016 you could just feel that looming tension between the NLD and the military. But it seems to me there was also a lot of tension between the NLD and civil society at that time. Oh, sorry, are you having trouble hearing? That there was tension between the NLD and civil society. I was there a couple years later interviewing journalists and freedom of expression advocates, and none told me they felt confidence in the NLD's ability to conduct itself democratically in many ways, to withstand the pressure of military and cronyism, but even without that. So I'm wondering how that fits into the mix, that tension, and what the thought warriors think about the civilian politicians and those tensions with civil society. Thank you.
So you have a pretty good idea of this. I always felt that the NLD was not always trusted, and Aung San Suu Kyi was increasingly unpopular. But she has a lot of charisma, so people just. Now I have been to meetings where she comes in and people just go crazy. They just love her. But that's different from trusting her judgment. And a lot of the people I talked to, the thought warriors, they thought she bargained with the devil in going to defend. These people are very pro human rights concepts that defending the regime in Netherlands against the Rohingya. And they also thought she went too far in joining hands with the military. So these are, I think, civil society. That the CDMs that I'm talking about, they were not forming any political party, and they were already politically conscious a few years before that. So I didn't think NLD itself would be the savior of Myanmar. But on the other hand, it does have a lot of popularity, a lot of base, and so it's like any country. It is going to be the dominant party. We have many examples in Asia of dominant parties, one single party, and either by coercion or by legitimacy, like Congress party used to be in India, not anymore. So they could, they will have a significant say, but there will be always, as any big political party, there will be factions, there will be also bargaining coalitions. An inevitable byproduct of federal democracy is coalition government. There will be no single party that will form the government. And the coalition government to me is good because it keeps some checks and balances. But other than that, how far this tension will go? This is a country has a history of divisions and divisions within divisions and within divisions. But this is not unusual for a post-colonial state. That's what I'm saying. Burma is not unique. Let's just forget that we are totally different. Now, we're not dealing with a very unique situation. I think it was the choices made by some of the leaders and a set of circumstances. Certainly, the British divided and ruled the country, but they did it everywhere. The rejection of federal democracy was actually a very significant factor. But again, there are other countries who have managed to survive this. So you cannot provide a scientific one-line explanation for this. But I think if there are like new elections and the NUG is a coalition, the NUG may not last. It will have factions. There will be divisions between NLD and other NUG factions. But I think we have to create the framework, and that's what I'm talking about. New constitution, new guarantees of civil liberties, and bring back certain normalcy to the country. And once that comes in, things will not be perfect, but at least will be better than what we have now.
Thank you. So, yes.
Teng Tai U from Voice of America. My name is Teng Tai U from Voice of America. Sorry. Recently, the Chinese government, they mediated ceasefire agreement between the MNDAA, Kokang Ethnic Armed Group, and the SAC troops. Do you see that ceasefire agreement is fragile or durable? And when we talk about the role of China to prevent the junta collapse, in February there will be 4 years anniversary of the military coup. Do you still think they have strong enough to support the junta to carry on beyond 2025? Thank you.
So I have already mentioned a little bit of what I'm going to answer, but China is the most significant external, if you call it external, player in Myanmar. So there is no other country that has more sort of leverage because of the border, because of China's power and resources, the history of supporting factions and ethnic groups like the Wa. So China has a significant leverage, but not total leverage in what happens to the outcome. I think it will be very difficult to have a solution in Myanmar if China doesn't accept it. but China cannot create that solution either. So China is not going to be able to impose its own solution, nor we can have a solution without China's support. So I think China's main concern is its own security, border security, which is understandable. I mean, it was, there were the scam groups that really hurt Chinese economy and also Chinese image. But at the same time, it's a little bit reminds me of other border areas of China, where using your control over an ethnic group inside another country's border is a significant source of leverage. And China is not the only country to do that. But I think if China really, so what China wants elections because it sees the only way that you can have legitimacy without a collapse of the military. And I personally think China does not want the military to collapse. So if China would have pushed in that direction, things would have been a lot worse for the military now. And why China did not do it? Because of its security, border security will be worse if the military collapses. Maybe because that's the way it has been used to, having a country that is divided. And then, of course, its own support for certain ethnic groups in northeastern Burma. But I think one thing is very clear, that without Chinese, this mediation effort, by the way, did not last very long. And you cannot overstate China's influence, because not all the ethnic groups are under Chinese control, or they look to China. In fact, there has been reports of distrust of China has grown since the capture of La Xiao, and also the Chinese policy of preventing further advances by the opposition groups, the EAOs. China actually may be causing itself long-term harm by alienating the opposition, by preventing what not all but many opposition groups said there are a chance of moving much further in defeating the military. So China has to make a choice. I mean, it's the way it has the leverage. It can actually, China is pushing the military, the regime, the generals, to hold elections. There is no question about it. China wants to see elections, okay, because it thinks that's the best outcome for China's interest. But what if there is elections cannot be held? China also doesn't control all the, doesn't have the leverage over all the ethnic groups, especially further away from the south. It doesn't have the influence on the Chin and the Sagaing area, south of Mandalay, although there's not a southern part of Shan state. China is a necessary part of a solution, but it's not. It's also not an actor at this moment that wants to see the collapse of the military. So we will see. I mean, as I said, to say that Myanmar doesn't have a civil war is burying your head in the sand, because Myanmar already has a civil war. So what do you do about it? But I think there are a couple of things China can do, prevent any further bloodshed. There was some report of Chinese intervention when the military was indiscriminately shooting at demonstrators, that China also warned them. So that's a good thing. And we haven't seen too much of that. Now the fighting is between insurgent groups and the military. It's not necessarily between the civilian demonstrators and the military, as was the case immediately after the coup, when a lot of innocent people died on the streets. So maybe that's one positive role China played. But if I was an EAO, if I was a PDF, I will think that China's intervention was against their interest. The Chinese mediation and intervention actually stopped them from having more territorial gains, or more gains. And that's what I believe. And that's why it makes China less popular. But doesn't mean it's not an actor. It still has a role to play. And China, of course, wants to work with the ASEAN. Everybody wants to work with the ASEAN, except that ASEAN cannot work within itself.
Right. Don't you think, though, that China is now becoming so much more influential in Southeast Asia, partly because I think the rise of the Trump administration is fueling more insecurity in Southeast Asia, and likely that China's insistence on these elections and also extreme pressure on ASEAN to go along with it
Yeah.
may actually result in some serious pressure on these Southeast Asian countries.
Let me think about it.
Sorry to make your brain hurt.
So you were saying that. Sorry, can you?
Well, I was just saying that some people feel that the rise of Trump and his fixation on global and many other things, and Southeast Asia is probably ranking very low, is making Southeast Asia feel more insecure. Meanwhile, China has, as we have all watched in the last few years, really built its influence, poured money into this region, etc., and as a result is developing more and more influence. And one thing it really wants, which it sees as key to solving not just some of its own short-term geographic problems in Myanmar, and it wants that pipeline, it wants the railroads, it wants all its infrastructure, is also, getting some sort of stability. And you're right, they've decided to back they've decided that the military is probably their central power. So my point is, don't you feel that in some ways this is all feeding in to, the growing Chinese pressure on ASEAN, Southeast Asia, to play ball and at least fall in with the whole, sham election plan?
You have a point there. Yeah, that's cool, because the combination of circumstances, the U.S. not interested or may not be interested. We don't know that.
Not interested.
Yeah, the United States is also not a singular government. The U.S. Congress does have a constituency that cares about Burma, and the best thing that will happen for Southeast Asia, by the way, is for U.S. Trump to ignore Southeast Asia. Yes. Because if you come to his attention, that's bad news.
Yes.
If he just forgets about you, that's actually good news to me.
Or can't find you on the map.
So my advice
to
to Southeast Asians is don't visit Washington. Don't meet Trump. Just stay away from him. And let him send the Secretary of State, who is a very good guy. Marco Rubio is actually quite a decent guy. And so let him handle all this. But joking aside, it's not actually a joke. It's actually a serious point. There have been cases where Southeast Asian leaders went to Washington in the first Trump administration. He did not like what they said, and there were consequences. Okay, so yes, the elections and what China is pushing for, the U.S. Indifference, distraction, and the incapacity of ASEAN to create a solution on its own does play into China's hands. China is by far the most consequential actor in Myanmar already. But then what will be the outcome? That's what I'm talking about. Yeah. Can you really have an election that China can supervise? China is building a joint security force with Myanmar army. Maybe China will deploy a large number of forces to keep peace and have elections. That's not something I am not sure China is willing to do. China's interest actually is in the border area. So what the security force is going to do is to manage security in the border area. You can organize elections there, but what about further south? Would even the Myanmar military allow China to come in so deep into the heartland of Burma? This is also very national, the question of Myanmar nationalism. So I think China does have more cards now. But by the way, the ASEAN has a historic suspicion of China when it comes to China building a lot of influence in Myanmar. So if you go back to the 1990s, you'll see one of the reasons why ASEAN accepted Myanmar as a member is because that was the argument, that otherwise it will fall into Chinese hands. And I don't think the Thais will like it, the Malaysians will like it. So they might also have their own counter to that. So my sense is that the Chinese influence, the potential for that to grow is very much there, but China as the only actor that can decide the outcome, I don't think that's going to happen. Right. But the United States, we have to wait and see how the United States is going to play this. The presidential level, less attention for sure, but at the congressional level, Secretary of State, and the foreign policy bureaucracy, it may make a little bit of difference.
Yeah.
Or it's possible that the US will tell to Japan and India, especially Japan, we used to do it instead of ASEAN. And Japan can actually play a greater role. It's already playing that role.
Okay, thank you. And I think we just have 2 more questions and we'll wrap. Steve, are you in the queue there?
Yeah, thank you. My name is Steve Parker. 2 comments and 1 question. 1 comment about bringing in Aung San Suu Kyi. Many people felt that the best thing that the SAC could have done to ferment disarray amongst the resistance would have been to release her. And I think it was, the pride stopped that. But there's definitely a sense that that there are frictions there. And I'll get to that, to the 3rd comment. A second question is, there's a lot of discussion, and you mentioned about talking to military leaderships and lack of power. I'd like to know, when you're thinking about the role of economic reform and economic interest in the coup, going up through the NLD and beginning in the earlier government, there were massive economic reforms, and there were many economic reforms that were lined up for the next parliament. And these were bringing in competition from all over the world and adding huge amounts of transparency that was making it very difficult for the military and crony companies to make any money. And some people feel that was a major element of why they did the coup, not just the pride and the nationalism. I'd like to get your view on that.
Okay. So
and then if I could make a third quick comment, sort of a question, is in terms of balkanization, there's a lot going on internally amongst the EROs and NUG. And there's a kind of model, and I think be interested to see what you think about this model, but the model that we see happening is that amongst the EROs, some of them with decades-old administrative units and some building up new ones, all sort of aiming towards traditional good governance with transparency based with democratic input, in a way that would be much like states and provinces in Canada and the United States, where you've got autonomous decision-making at the state and local level in many ways, but you're working under a federal environment. A lot of that's going on right now, and there's a lot of discussion amongst the various resistance groups. As the new armed groups get going, it's a little bit harder to know. There's clearly some tensions there, but to me, it's a positive model where it'll make it easier for them to all come together in a federal environment if they all have sort of similar approaches towards good governance and democracy at the state level, but ones with clear state autonomy.
Okay. I missed your first point.
I think the first point was a comment.
Yeah.
I think he had 2 questions and a comment, right?
The economic reform question, I'm not the best person to judge this, but my sense of, in fact, one of our graduates from my university did his PhD in economics, and he was working for one of the think tanks, and before the coup. And my sense is that the plan was good, okay, as plans go, but incremental, liberalization, more transparency, measures against corruption, those are not really very unusual bold steps, and managing natural resources, so allowing foreign investment, but within certain, like every country in this region, certain restrictions against corruption. But I thought that, personally speaking, the NLD's economic plan was not a bad one at all, to the extent that I can judge it. When the key to Myanmar's long-term economic reform is to divestment of military-owned business. The way it happened in Indonesia, fairly dramatic. Indonesian military has very little control over any business anymore. That was not happening. And that was one of the points of contestation between the NLD and the military. Because when the NLD suggested, or Aung San Suu Kyi suggested, give up your business, military said, over our dead body. And this is not very different from what happened in Indonesia. Indonesian military completely surrendered its assets, which were actually at one point even more important, substantial than what Myanmar military has. So this is a very different situation. After any scenario talking about defeat of the military or military voluntarily giving up power and participating in a broader democratic process through military-backed parties, like USDP, for example. They're not going to have any right, any ability to retain control over the resources, because that boat has sailed. This was possible in 2008, 2015, 2011, but not anymore. So that will be good. That to me is the ultimate reform. There will be corruption, there will be nepotism, which country doesn't have it? And there will be investments. There was a joke about constructive engagement. Kavi would know. I used to say when Myanmar opened up in the 1980s and 90s, through the policy of ASEAN constructive engagement, I used to say it was all construction, no engagement. Because most of the ASEAN countries, from Thailand, Malaysia, Singapore, came in with hotels and basically tourism-related business. And they did not really push for any political change or a real significant economic reform. It was very rent-seeking capitalism model. Now, I am hoping, and I do know, because as I said, one of my friends who did his doctorate in economics and working in the before the coup in the economics ministries, thought it was really serious. We have to stop, totally divert the military from owning business, and we have to have also this rent-seeking, resource-exploiting foreign companies coming in and building condos and hotels and also indirectly controlling the mining. To me, that will be the best economic reform. Anything beyond that, how much you liberalize, foreign investment, which like industrial policy, which sectors you promote. This is a country with a lot of natural resources, but most of it is mismanaged or predatory. Military owns directly or through its cronies. How do you do that? Well, if you can do that, that'll be good, and then develop certain sectors through industrial policy. It's not going to happen overnight, but at least much better than what was happening before the coup. The NLD had a good policy, but could not implement it because it was stymied by the military with threats that you cannot touch our property, our business. That's ours, and you can stay in power under these restrictions, but you cannot touch. And that was one of the many reasons why the military, distrust between the military and the Aung San Suu Kyi and NLD grew. That plus the fact that there were some very impatient elements in the NLD who wanted to, they said, don't wait. And they had a right, we want the power, we should be in the government, and we should get rid of this constitution. Creating that anxiety and fear in a military that has been used to ruling for decades. So I understand their sentiment, but I think it was not, did not have the outcome. It backfired, the best way to put it. The first question I did not get, I'm sorry.
No,
maybe
that was a comment.
Yeah, it was also a comment, okay.
No, there was a third question, right?
Well, the idea of a model, when you think about balkanization, the idea of bringing in the ethnic groups and then you chief under a common approach towards autonomous state level, local level governance based on best practice.
Best practice.
Similar approaches that can then mold into a federal democracy more easily than some people may think.
Yeah. No, I mean, absolutely. There are a lot of best practices around, and I don't think that will be difficult. One of the problems that's going to happen, what you do at the federal level, at the national level, is it going to filter down to the local level? So many democracies have suffered because they have an agreement among the top elite. But when they go back to their home state, just like the United States, you can make a deal in Washington, D.C. When you go back to Minnesota or Arizona, then you'll have very different vibes. So, but this is a country which is divided within itself many, many times, and even among ethnic groups. And this idea of a state, I'm talking about provinces here at that level, in Myanmar is not what it is in other parts of the world. It's very ethnically focused, and ethnic groups are divided among themselves. So what you decide best practices, sitting down in a Pangalon conference, like General Aung San type of deal, in a retreat, you draft a constitution, can you sell it to your people? Who is going to sell that to their people? So the best way to me would be to actually adopt a federal democratic structure talk about best practices, but leave the actual implementation with certain amount of autonomy to the state level. But I think the state level also should have elections, which is something that India has, US has, but Indonesia still doesn't have it to that extent. So you have to have actually elected representatives ruling the states and not just appointed from the center. And then there will be conflict. You'll fight it out. Some states will do better, some others won't do so well. But this is something most democracies have to live with. There's a term called consociational democracy, where you live together despite hating each other, because you know the alternative is total collapse. And there are a lot of countries that have survived, including European countries, where there is no trust between ethnic groups, but they think alternative is collapse, and you don't want to go there. So it's possible. But I think the NGOs and think tanks, they have started compiling best practices on democracy, justice. And another thing that I have written about in the past is transitional justice. You have to have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission of type. There are a lot of atrocities, even before, and now since 2021. This is not going to be easily forgotten. And truth and reconciliation has not worked in every country, but it has worked surprisingly better than most people realize. And that is also a place where you can talk about different ways of bringing justice and best practices of governance, and there are certain universal models. It's not just Western versus Eastern. There are certain practices of governance, like not having corruption and not having proper arbitration, dispute settlement mechanisms, or some kind of rule of law, not ruled by law. It's possible. And these things can be provided not just by international foreign government, but international organizations, which and a lot of these rules, by the way, these days are drafted by Global South countries, not through their own governments, but at the UN level. Very significantly good economists from Global South have been members of commissions and in the UN, UNDP. And UNDP to me is not surprisingly, it's a great organization. I know, one of the best. I've worked with them. They can help with all this.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And we were just going to take one, but I think, all right. Two more.
Two questions.
I was here for a long time following Steve.
Yes,
but,
it's all right.
Okay,
You don't have to justify.
I am Leah Shortino from Maidon.
Introduce yourself.
Yes, I am introducing myself. I am Leah Shortino from Maidon University and also director of Sea Junction, which is a public venue focusing on Southeast Asia, including Myanmar. My question is about the future, right? This image of federalism, which is complicated by the fact that we are dealing with many ethnic armies, right? And now the question to me is how democratic are, because the assumption is they come together with good governance, they sit together, they all talk. How democratic are these ethnic armies in our vision of the future? And how respectful of human rights? So, okay, the demonstrator on the street at the beginning, they were clearly for a democratic Burma, new Burma, with idea of inclusion, social inclusion, human rights, and all the rest. But this is not necessarily the vision of the many EO. We have seen people tribunals, we have seen prisoners being executed, we are seeing blatant human rights abuses committed by many of the army, including some PDF groups. So the question is, moving forward, if indeed they are going to win against the current military, will they be also authoritarian? Or will they be our hope that they will be respectful? I agree with you, it doesn't matter what, but respectful of human rights. Or they will commit similar model of government and similar model of authoritarian model. And then comment on Indonesia. Unfortunately, the military didn't give up everything. They are there. They have a lot of money still, and Wifungsi is back it's never gone away really, and nowadays it's there. So Indonesia to me is also not necessarily the ideal example, because we see with Prabowo, Luhut, and all the rest, they are very firm in power these days. But this is a comment on the side. It's more about the future with all the Arakan army and all the other army in power.
I completely agree with you. I mean, there are EAOs and other types of ethnic militia that are capable of very brutal human rights abuses. But let's keep two things in mind. This is the first time in the history of, Burma as a country, that the ethnic majority is actually fighting the military. In the past, the military was fighting the minority groups, militias. So this is really a struggle for the soul of the Burma group as well as anything else. And also, during the struggle, I think a fairly substantial understanding has been achieved between the Burma groups and also the ethnic ethnic armed organizations and ethnic minorities. This happened also before. In, I think, 1940s, when the first constitution was drafted. But the situation was not that at that time. There was deep mistrust, nurtured continuously for centuries by the British, that don't trust the Burma majority, gave more privileges to the Karens and the Shans and the Kachins, and told them not to trust the Burma military. And they thought they were going to lose their privilege under a Burma majority. Now, that's no longer the case, because this time everybody is in the receiving end, okay? That doesn't mean you won't have corruption. They will have corrupt individual leaders who want to seize power in a pocket and, in a province or in a district or a township, and this is going to happen. But I think there is more reason to be confident that there will be enough, a critical mass of people from various ethnic groups to accept the norms of democracy. And as I said, human rights to me is actually far more important, that they will respect the lives and liberty of individuals. And there will be, of course, instability, there will be corruption, there will be individual leaders, drug lords, that will emerge. But these are not uncommon in many societies, but manageable. So those are the two differences, that because the majority of the country is fighting the military and not just the minority, and the majority also realize they need the military, they need the minority to trust them, and they have also given them some positions in NUG, which would have been difficult in the past. So it might have a better chance to work. But I fully agree that there are some very bad elements who among the ethnic organizations, they don't believe in democracy, they're corrupt, they just want to make money, and they kill, torture. But let's say we criminalize them, as opposed to, valorize them, make them look like it's a natural part of living in Burma.
Thank you. And the final question. Finally. Sorry, we're keeping
Thank
you
you
working.
very much. My name is Song Tae. I come from Kachin State, Myanmar. Many people are dying, and villages are burning, and also we as a Kachin ethnic group, I myself, we have been suffering for more than 60 years already. So why? It's not only armed conflict and not only the people are dying. Actually, in fact, in the border area, Kachin State especially, where I come from, we have been exploiting our precious resources during this, after the military coup. So there are, even today is in the border, even though the border is closed, but all the illegal logging, gold mining, all the mineral mining, rare earth mining, all these are happening right now in our border area. So all of these, our conflicts are very clearly, all our civilians are overcoming. Why the Chinese are inviting the ethnic group to the China, and they make a kind of ceasefire agreement just last week. So as a international community in this 21st century, can we do anything? My question is, the international community, can we do anything, any small thing to this issue, and or the peaceful is become peaceful? So my question is that please, if you have, I think as a international community, we also have a kind of role to give a kind of advocacy to China. That is my question. Thank you.
Yeah. So that's a great question, and thank you for posing that. First of all, I'm not a great believer in the whole idea of international community. I don't know even what that means. But that's not to say outsiders cannot play a role. I mean, we have got examples. I mean, for all its flaws, the United Nations Transitional Authority in Cambodia did a good job under FCCT, and I have observed it from very close quarters. It did not lead to the perfect democracy in Cambodia, but it was certainly not the return of the Khmer Rouge the way it was there before. So I think the international community can play a role in facilitating mediation, reconciliation, and of course the usual aid and for development or advice, which was already happening in the 2010s. But ultimately, and this is one thing I was really surprised when I was doing my research with CDMs, the young generation never mentioned international community. They did not ever mention ASEAN. I was kind of desperately trying to get a quote. Can you tell me, now this questioner had a question of ASEAN, and nobody answered that. And people are basically silent. They don't have a, they said, oh yeah, ASEAN, we heard about it. That's pretty much the extent of that. They actually had more trust on the ethnic armed organization. Don't tell me why. I'm still trying to figure this out. They said, we need to have some fighting. These are sincere people. Despite, and I know they know corruption and their brutality of the years. They had less confidence in NLD. NUG, of course, was just being formed at that time. They thought these are the same politicians, they'll play the same kind of role, politics as usual. Who is in the NUG? Same people who have been trying to be or in power or trying to be in power. So they wanted some fresh faces, fresh blood, and they did not really see international community playing a role. And these are people who are very well educated. Some of them spoke pretty good English. Idealistic, young, but so what does that tell us? I mean, maybe there are, and this is one of the rationale for the book, that most of us, and I'm sure many of you, as journalists have visited. I myself at one point wanted to be a journalist. This was my first choice as a career, actually. But as an academic also, I do a lot of field work. And we often go to capital cities and meet with the elite and an expert professor, sometimes even a minister, if we can get access to them. And we never really talk to this generation and see what they want. These are the people who are going to be older and have a greater role in the society. And hopefully they will have access to power. So their view is that it has to be settled within the country, that we have a chance. And exactly what I'm saying about, the first time the majority of our people to which they actually belong, but they have also friends from ethnic minority groups, that we are working together. We have a common vision. We want to get rid of this evil force, the military. There was no question that, I have spoken to a lot of older generation Burmese people, and they have a nostalgia about the military, including some people within one family divided. You can read my book, A Family Divided Against Itself. The parents think the military is important and cannot be. The younger generation think this is evil, including some people who have worked for the military before. So the older generation still think, the military is important. they fought for our freedom. After all, they think Burma's independence had to do with military struggle, armed struggle, not just negotiation. That's a deeply ingrained belief among the Burmese, and that's what they told about in history books. So the younger generation doesn't think that's the way to go. They think we have to have fresh ideas, fresh blood, and there is a chance now for the ethnic groups, minorities and majority, to work together because we have a common enemy. And we do not want to have anything to do with military having any share of the power. Well, as changes happen, these are ideas on the back of which changes will happen. That's not to say that the old problems will disappear, but the distrust that you see among the ethnic groups, and even within Shan State, there are hundreds of factions. I mean, just to exaggerating it, within one ethnic group, the individual personality-based leadership. But this young generation doesn't buy that anymore. The narrative is different. And for whatever the fault of the 10 years of experiment in democracy, there were a lot of good ideas that went into Myanmar. People went to teach. I taught myself, talking about, to this group of former political prisoners. This guy, Jagannath, spent 11 years in solitary confinement. I said, how did you survive? So he said, he played this, string games. And he said, I did most of the time that. And my translator, who was also in a solitary confinement, then they came out of that. They were dying for what is happening in the world. They wanted to know everything. So there's nothing I said that was irrelevant, things that I would not sense too trivial. For them, it was important. They read. I think the young generation was getting there. And I am being probably a little too idealistic and optimistic, but I think we should look at how do we engage that young generation. And even if the old generation, the NUG does have certain international obligations. And this happens, by the way, in many cases, like South Korea, for example, even Philippines. When a country's opposition gets foreign support, they feel certain moral obligation. It doesn't last very long, but you have, Korea Aquino, the South Koreans, they got fellowships at Western universities. They get support when they're in the opposition. It's not easy for them to come and become a dictator. They can, but they usually don't. So I think that's where I think the international community can play a role. Education and trying to change the mindset and target the younger generation who, to me, I'm talking about people in the 15, 16, 17, 18 to 20, 25. And I think there is hope. And as you can see, there is, in my book, I came up feeling more optimistic about the future of the country. Despite calling it tragic, the title, I felt that there are people wanting change. And what is the alternative? I mean, we can be pessimists and realists and say, okay, nothing is going to change. But that's a defeatist, self-fulfilling prophecy. And let's hope that there will be maybe, some people gave me 2 years, things will change. Some people say 4 years. But they all said things will change, okay? And I was very skeptical, still I'm skeptical, but I have been an optimist most of my life, and I've seen change happen. Nobody thought Indonesia will become a democracy. And Indonesia today is a much more of a vibrant democracy than in our lifetime. Maybe this will happen. But instead of thinking about that, we completely give up and say nothing is ever going to change. There is a cultural factor against Burmese people accepting democracy or human rights. If we think like that, that's bad tactics, to say the least. It may be true, but that's a bad way to look and do conflict management. And we are supposed to be problem solvers, giving ideas to solve the problem, not to perpetuate the cycle of tragedy and misery that this country, which could have been the most advanced country of Southeast Asia, has lost its chance because of a very predatory military and a very indifferent, throughout history, very indifferent so-called international community.
Right. So with a closing observation here, Amitav, you don't seem entirely pessimistic. So why did you call it Tragic Nation? It's a very downer of a title.
You know, for me, tragedy is not necessarily a bad word, okay? Shakespearean tragedy, you know, it is tragic. What else? How else can you
They're
describe?
pretty tragic Shakespearean tragedies.
It was at one point where the rice basket, the largest exporter of rice, and Yangon University is where Southeast Asian Studies was founded. DGE Ho was a professor at Yangon University, the most advanced, along with the University of Philippines, and people used to dream of going to Rangoon and to study and build a career. Amartya Sen, the Nobel Prize winner, grew up in Myanmar and went to school there. His father was working there. This is what has happened since then. And that's what, and Aung San's writings, if you read it, is so visionary. I mean, he did make some political miscalculation or mistakes. I mean, I can't really judge that. But certainly you read his, I compiled a bunch of his thoughts into an article for my book. Not this book. This book has a little bit of that. He was ahead of his time. So this country can produce, despite all the ethnic divisions and poverty, can produce good minds, and that's what my optimism is about.
Right.
But tragedy is about, I think, you know, Gwen, you are a journalist. Sometimes you give titles. Just think that it just comes to you. I gave this title, unlike some of my new books where the publisher insists on giving the title. Most of my books are titled by myself, and I thought Tragic Nation because I felt very sad. And you know, this is a country that is very dear to me personally. So maybe I'm getting carried away here, and I spent so much time. And there's one story. I'll conclude with this. When I first went to second time I went to Burma, I took the Silk Air flight to talk about human rights to the military and a bunch of civil servants. And when I was coming back on the flight, they wanted to bring me directly to the plane, and I just wanted to eat some Myanmar Burmese food last time. And I asked this very pathetic cafe at the airport, do you have any Burmese food? He said, no, we have only sandwich. So I said, oh, that's really disappointing. I have an hour before my flight. And then 20 minutes later, he disappeared. 20 minutes later, he brings me a tiffin carrier, you know, the tiffin box. And he said, you know, this is my own food. My wife had cooked for me. You have it.
Oh.
At the airport, just 15 minutes before my flight. And I actually had the capacity to actually tell my handler, keep the flight waiting. I want to actually eat this. But this is just so moving. And this person, so, you know, and this is 1990s. I have so many experiences like this to tell you during my many visits and teaching there. That's why I feel torn. I want this to be optimistic, but I feel also very sad.
Right.
And that this is
Understand.
tragedy.
What's the name of your next one then?
I was thinking of actually, no, I haven't thought about it, but I will probably have to update it. The publisher Penguin wants to update it. And I'm not going to use balkanized nation, fragmented nation. I don't know. I think the immediate thing will be to use this discussion and possibly some more research to can go back there to update this book. See what has happened since 2022, 23.
Okay, let's workshop the title.
Yeah. Maybe I don't think I'll change the title. I will keep the title, but maybe subtitle can change. Hopes for the future. We'll see.
Something like that. Okay, I think on that note, we've kept you 2 hours. Thank you, Amitav.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity. Yeah.
We'll have a little photo. Sorry? We'll have a little photo opportunity.
Okay.
We'll get Mark as the photographer. He's very good. But Mark, can you take a...
It was the best question you've ever asked.
It's very good.
That's not a good question.
Yes, big questions.
Wait. I want to show you something. Look at this. This is my notes before, just when you were about to.
Yeah.
So, can I ask you, I'll just take one of these.